There was a time when you moved through the world with fluid ease. You could enter a room and immediately calibrate your energy, your language, and your expression to whatever unspoken codes the situation required. But something deep and quiet shifted. Now, the rooms that once held you feel too loud and airless. The conversations that used to feel like connection have become a draining performance, a gradual loosening of the grip you once had on belonging. You've begun to notice the gap. You see the disparity between the faces people wear and the wounds they carry, the conversation happening on the surface versus the entirely different, unacknowledged current running beneath the words. Once you have the eyes for this gap, you cannot stop noticing it. Ordinary participation in collective life begins to cost something it never cost before. The illusion is broken, and the performance feels inherently false. This awakening manifests somatically. It arrives as a physical weight in your chest, a heaviness in crowded spaces, and an exhaustion that sleep cannot touch. Forcing yourself to inhabit the old persona requires a form of internal violence. It produces a persistent feeling of inauthenticity, the sense of wearing someone else's face and speaking words that belong to a character, not a living person. Loved ones often look at this withdrawal and see only absence or depression. But Carl Jung spent decades mapping this exact experience, identifying a logic so precise that this pulling away looks more like intelligence. These physical symptoms are the price of maintaining consciousness in an environment organized around unconsciousness. It is the grueling labor of holding your center when the collective current is pulling you toward sleep. Jung discovered that society functions on shared agreements that remain operational only as long as they remain unexamined. It is a system that runs on unconsciousness. This system relies on shadow projection. When we cannot face our own anger or shame, we locate it firmly in someone else. Most swim in these projections invisibly, but the empath absorbs them directly, feeling the current of others' shadow material as physical pressure. Maintaining awareness in these environments is like swimming upstream in a tsunami of unacknowledged projections. For the conscious person, the sheer volume of shadow material makes the collective water toxic. Eventually, you have to get out of the water or drown. The withdrawal is a requirement for survival. This necessary departure is the hermit phase. It is a deliberate descent into solitude and silence, moving toward the margins of the known world to preserve the consciousness you have worked so hard to develop. Jung modeled this retreat himself at Bollingen, his stone tower by the lake. In that silence, away from the noise of others' projections, he pioneered the psychological territory that the collective was not yet ready to see. This withdrawal is often experienced by those around you as a wound or a judgment. They grieve the version of you that was warm and available, often labeling your transformation as burnout or arrogance to avoid the discomfort of your absence. This phase is the mandatory biological condition for transformation. Like a seed requiring darkness to germinate, the awakening empath requires silence to finish the work that cannot begin amid the noise of collective demands. The most difficult work of this isolation happens when you turn your gaze inward. You must eventually confront the shadow of your own empathy. Often, the identity of the empath hides a secret hunger to be needed. Absorbing the pain of others can become a sophisticated way to avoid sitting alone with your own interior darkness. Solitude forces a disorienting question. Who are you when you are not performing care? Without the incoming tide of other people's emotions to orient yourself by, you are forced to encounter yourself in the absence of a role. This internal audit is the only way to break the cycle. Without it, the empath simply drags their old wounds into new environments, enacting the exact same exhausting dynamics under a slightly different name. If you weather the disorientation of the hermit phase without fleeing back to performance, the false persona begins to dissolve. You stop negotiating between what is true and what is acceptable. This allows for the emergence of the self, a grounded experience of being exactly who you are. This is a quality of presence that is not empty, but full, a sense of being for once in the right life. Your sensitivity remains, but it is now anchored to a solid internal architecture. You can receive experience without being undone by it, observing the weight of the collective shadow without being crushed beneath it. Individuation eventually leads to a return, but not to the center of the noise. You return to the threshold spaces, the margins where the mainstream ends and something quieter and more honest begins. From this edge, you offer the perspective of someone who has been below the surface and come back. You provide a presence that This quiet departure builds a specific kind of internal structure, a safe harbor that remains standing when the collective noise becomes deafening. By consenting to become yourself in the silence,